As the coronavirus continues to hobble the U.S. economy, Congress proposes a $3 trillion stimulus package. But what about the debt? Physician and Tennessee Congressman Mark Green is here with analysis. And relations between Communist China and the U.S. are straining. What will become of the trade deal? And will U.S. companies stop investing in China? Asian affairs expert Gordon Chang joins us with details. And when and how might colleges and universities reopen their campuses this fall? University Presidents Christopher Ice and Dr. Tim Trainor will tell us. Catholic mom, stand-up comic, and author Jennifer Fulwiler stops by to talk about her new book, Your Blue Flame. And finally, how are small and medium-sized businesses, particularly those in the hospitality industry, surviving the pandemic? We'll talk to an owner. The World Over begins right now.
Now, Raymond Arroyo.
Greetings from New Orleans and a warm welcome to all of you joining us in the United States and the world over. We've got a great show for you. Congressman Mark Green, Gordon Chang, Christopher Ice of Ave Maria, and Dr. Tim Trainor of Mount St. Mary's, as well as Jen Fulwiler, are all straight ahead. If you'd like to comment on tonight's show, send me a tweet. I'm at Raymond Arroyo. Lots to cover. First, some news. As COVID-19 cripples the world's economy, the Vatican is facing serious financial difficulty. The Holy See is having a tough time balancing its budget, according to Jesuit Father Juan Antonio Guerro Alves. He's the head of the Vatican's dicastery for finances. In a recent interview, Guerrero denied media reports that the Vatican is near default. He did acknowledge, however, that the financial future looks grim as donations from the world's Catholics drop during this economic downturn. Guerrero and Cardinal Reinhard Marx, the head of the Pontifical Council for the Economy, are both urging drastic cost-cutting measures be taken in all Vatican offices. Here in the United States, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi unveiled a more than $3 trillion coronavirus aid package Tuesday. The House is expected to vote on it as soon as Friday, but Senate Republicans are not planning to vote on any new relief measures until June, following the Memorial Day recess. Joining me now to discuss this proposed stimulus bill and more is physician and Republican Congressman from Tennessee, a member of the House Oversight Committee, Mark Green. He joins us from Washington. Congressman, I want to go through some of what's in this proposed bill from Democrats. It has nearly $1 trillion for states, cities, and tribal governments to avert layoffs. The bill will offer a fresh round of $1,200 direct cash aids to individuals, up to $6,000 per household. The bill will also launch a $175 billion housing assistance fund to help pay rents and mortgages, which would continue through January. It also adds $75 billion more for virus testing. What do you make of the Democrats' proposed $3 trillion stimulus plan? Is this what we need now?
We definitely do not need this now. We haven't even spent the $2 trillion that's in the CARES Act. A little frustrated. I think I heard Nancy Pelosi the other day say on MSNBC that this was an opportunity for them to push their vision forward. Well, I don't see this as an opportunity. We've got tens of thousands of Americans who've died. I mean, more than actually died in the Vietnam War. So I don't know if Pelosi sees that as an opportunity, but it's pretty ridiculous. This is a crisis, and it's not a chance for them to push their progressive vision for America. Like I said, we've got $2 trillion that we haven't even spent in our previous passages, and one of them, part of that CARES Act was $765 billion for state and local governments, and they haven't even spent that. So this is just crazy. It's them pandering to their base. It's really bad for America.
I want to read you something. The Fed chairman said this week the economic damage is without historical precedent from this pandemic, and without more aid, it will deepen and prolong. So economists say we aren't doing enough for small businesses. Are they correct?
Well, the PPP program has substantially helped our small businesses, and there's money in the CARES Act, particularly as it relates to the larger corporations, that hasn't even been spent yet. So debt is also going to paralyze this country if we aren't careful. And the Fed chief may be right about the impact, but the best way to fix it is to open the economy and get America going again. That puts people back to work. It gives dignity with a job, and it gets our economy roaring again. I mean, Donald Trump's the right guy. He did it once. He'll do it again. We just have to open back up.
Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell said this about the proposed stimulus plan. I want you to listen.
Sure.
Look, I mean, we can't spend enough money to prop this economy up forever. People need to be able to begin to be productive again. That obviously means that you need to move forward consistent with the guidelines that have been laid down by the healthcare professionals toward opening up the economy. It's the only solution to the dilemma with which we are confronted.
So should we be focused on testing and reopening these economies up, these states?
Well, first, let me just say this. You know, we in Tennessee and several other states are already open. And you look at the data coming out of Georgia, they opened up the earliest, I think April the 24th, and their hospitalizations have decreased. Their total case numbers have decreased. Their deaths have decreased. So absolutely, we've got to get opened back up and get going. That's the only solution. You know, as a physician, you know, we make decisions based on a cost-benefit ratio, and to flatten the curve, we shut down the economy, and that was a good idea. The benefit and the cost ratio worked out. Now the goalpost is moved, Raymond, and they're talking about no transmission of the virus. Well, the cost-benefit ratio of that is just crazy. You can't sustain that, and the downstream costs are lives too. I mean, keeping cancer diagnosis and biopsies from happening, it's already predicted we're going to have 33,000 extra dead Americans from cancer because of the delays. They want more of that? That's crazy.
It's terrifying. And I'm glad you mentioned Florida and Georgia, both of which opened early and quickly. Georgia's rate of cases, COVID cases, have fallen since last week by 12%. Florida's down 14%. So the promises of a second wave or an explosion of cases once an economy opened, it doesn't seem to be bearing out. Why do you think that's the case, Doctor? We keep hearing from Dr. Fauci and others that second wave's coming. It's coming.
Well, I think what we'll ultimately find out when we do more serologic testing is that the virus has penetrated our country pretty heavily already. If you look at the serologic testing, and I understand there's a lot of criticism about the validity of some of these tests, but if you look at the Santa Clara County one in California, the Los Angeles County one in California, you look at some in Europe, you look at the one in New York that showed 14% of people tested had already been infected by the virus. Miami-Dade County, maybe the raw numbers themselves aren't as reliable as we'd like them to be, but one thing is absolutely for certain, that this virus is more prevalent in our society, in our country, than we originally thought, meaning the mortality rate is significantly less than what they're calculating right now based on the case fatality rate. And that means opening up is not the risk that some people are asserting that it is.
To those who suggest waiting to move forward on a stimulus plan, Speaker Pelosi said this. I want your reaction.
There are those who said, let's just pause. But the families who are suffering know that hunger doesn't take a pause, the rent doesn't take a pause, the bills don't take a pause, the hardship of losing a job or tragically losing a loved one doesn't take a pause.
Your thoughts, Congressman Green?
Conflating the deaths and the economic challenge. Yeah, I get very frustrated when the left does that. It's just not fair. It's not right. If people who want to pay their rent have a job, they can pay their rent. So the quicker we get the economy open, that's the solution. It's both the near-term and the long-term solution. It's the right thing to do. And this notion that, I don't know, some of the states, Oregon, midsummer, end of summer, it is absurd to think that they're going to keep their economy shut down that long. I know when Elon Musk was threatening to move his plant here in Tennessee, we were reaching out to him to try to get him to come. So they continue to do this. They're going to destroy their economies. And those states like, you know, Tennessee and Georgia and Florida, we'll get all their industry.
Well, it looks like some of these cities are going to be in deep hibernation until the fall, maybe till the end of the year. There is concern, we've heard it from Dr. Fauci and other health experts, that as the states begin to reopen, there'll be spikes in COVID cases, and some cities might have to shut down again. Should there be some stimulus plan, just in case, a recovery fund for those who might need it? Could you dedicate funds to that purpose, for businesses, for individuals?
You know, we can vote money very quickly. So having some fund set aside is unnecessary. And when government does that, it usually gets spent. So the best thing for us to do is, if there is this rare case where a community has an increase and it looks as if it's going to max out their hospital and ICU beds and ventilators, then we can respond. But there's no reason to set that money aside now. It'll just get spent.
Congressman, in your opinion, should spending cuts accompany these stimulus bills? I'm stunned by the lack of concern about our debt. I mean, these stimulus bills are as big as our economy.
Yeah, absolutely. The issue's always been in our country spending. Our debt has always been an issue of spending. It's not an issue of revenue. I mean, Trump proved that when he cut taxes, just like with Reagan, just like with Kennedy, just like with Calvin Coolidge, that you actually get an increase in overall revenue. So our problem is not, the revenue side. It is a spending side, and we have got to get some controls, or we're going to be in huge trouble. This is clearly going to be a big setback in that regard, and we did spend a lot of money. What we don't need to do is, without even spending all of the CARES Act money, vote for more money to be spent on this. So absolutely, the debt's a long-term issue, and the only way to fix it is to cut spending.
You've been asked to serve on this congressional committee on the coronavirus crisis created by Speaker Pelosi. You're the only doctor on that committee. What do you make of it, and what have the hearings been about so far?
Well, we've had one hearing, and the committee's taken, basically one action, and that was to send a letter out to various businesses that took PPP money, and it somehow offended the Democrats that they took this money. A company like a steel company in Ohio and Pennsylvania, they're bashing Americans. They're bashing Americans who are creating jobs, companies that are out there hiring Americans and got the PPP money. By the way, in accordance with the law that those very Democrats voted on and helped write. Instead of focusing the ire of this committee on where the problem started, and that's China. I just saw an article the other day that said, had China notified the world just 1 week sooner, 66% of the deaths could have been avoided. If you do the 66% of our current deaths in America, that's about 57,000 dead Americans who would not be dead had China just spoken up 1 week earlier. And the first thing the Democrats attack are American companies. If that doesn't tell you who the Democrat Party, the senior leadership of the Democrat Party is, nothing else does.
There have been over 16,000 cases and 273 deaths to date from COVID in Tennessee. Now, Tennessee's already begun to reopen. Has there been a significant increase in the COVID cases there since reopening? Do you know?
We have had a spike at one of our jails, one of our state facilities, and that makes it look like there's a spike. If you take out that one, facility where everybody, sort of was
is in close contact.
Then no, there's been no spike.
Wow, amazing. Congressman Mark Green, we will stay in touch. Thank you for being here.
Good to see you. Thanks for having me on the show, sir.
The FBI and cybersecurity experts say China is attempting to hack U.S. firms conducting coronavirus research. In a statement on Wednesday, the FBI said China has, quote, been observed attempting to identify and illicitly obtain valuable intellectual property and public health data related to vaccines, treatments, and testing. The Bureau is encouraging research firms to beef up cybersecurity to protect their data. The Communist Chinese government is denying the claims, accusing the U.S. of a smear campaign. As the COVID virus continues to disrupt world markets, President Trump this week expressed disinterest in renegotiating Phase 1 of the trade deal with China. This after Chinese news media reported that the communist government was dissatisfied with the current form of that agreement. What kind of game is Beijing playing? Here with analysis of the coronavirus effect on U.S.-China relations, global business, and much more is Asian affairs expert Gordon Chang. Gordon, thanks for being with us. I want to start with the U.S. trade deal with China. The coronavirus and China's handling of it are jeopardizing China's commitment to purchase $200 billion in U.S. exports by the end of next year. Sharp rhetoric from both sides we've heard all week, and it seems things have cooled as far as relations are concerned between the two. On Monday, President Trump reacted to a possible renegotiation of that trade deal with China this way.
No, I'm not interested. We signed a deal. I had heard that too. They'd like to reopen the trade talk to make it a better deal for them. China's been taking advantage of the United States for many, many years, for decades, because we had people at this position right here where I'm standing, sitting right in that office, the Oval Office, that allowed that to happen. No, I'm not interested in that. Let's see if they live up to the deal that they signed.
Is that the right approach for the president to take, Gordon Chang?
Absolutely the right approach, Raymond. And the reason is that Beijing knew about the coronavirus epidemic when they signed this deal. There's been a lot of people in state media who've been saying, oh, you know, this coronavirus epidemic is an unforeseen event. That unforeseen event refers to language in the Phase 1 trade deal, which would relieve a party of obligations. But when the Chinese actually signed this, they knew the severity of the outbreak in their own country. I don't think that they're entitled to any relief at all.
Will pulling back on trade force China, do you think, to be more transparent in its handling of COVID-19 and sharing information regarding its spread, or will it have no effect?
I think it will have no effect. Beijing is obviously hiding something. It has worked very hard to prevent an investigation into the origins of the disease. And I think that there's something there that they very much don't want us to know. So I don't think that anything regarding the trade deal will have an effect on the investigation.
How much leverage does the U.S. have to force China to make good on its commitments? For instance, the buying of all of those U.S. exports. Is there any way to measure or enforce the compliance?
Well, the one thing the United States can do is increase the tariffs under Section 301 of the Trade Act, which were a remedy for the theft of intellectual property. Those have been reduced according to the Phase 1, in pursuant to the Phase 1 trade deal. China needs the U.S. market desperately. And so if President Trump were to cut off access, that would have a substantial effect on the Chinese economy, driving it deeper into contraction.
Gordon, earlier this week, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo was described by Chinese media as insane after he claimed that there was enormous evidence showing that COVID-19 came from a Wuhan laboratory, though he clarified it did not appear to be man-made or genetically modified, but the media characterized him as a conspiracy theorist. Is there sufficient evidence proving that he might be right, that it came from a lab?
Well, there's certainly evidence, circumstantial evidence, and also there's science. So, for instance, The Lancet, which is the authoritative British medical journal, on January 24th, and again in the middle of February, showed that about a third of the original coronavirus cases had no connection with the wet market, which is the dominant theory of where this started. So if it didn't start in the wet market, then the obvious other candidate would be a Wuhan lab. that China has been maintaining. So right now, I think that there's substantial evidence for that. Also, we know that China didn't adhere to safety protocols and procedures in that lab. That comes from a 2018 State Department investigative visit. So there's a lot of evidence that points in that direction, Raymond.
You've said this week that the Secretary Pompeo's remarks, hit a nerve in Beijing. Can China continue to deny the evidence as it emerges?
Well, China has continued to deny the evidence, so I think they can go along with this in the indefinite future, but countries are going to make China pay a cost for it. And that cost could be quite severe. So, for instance, President Trump could cut off access to the Chinese market, something he talked about in that interview with Maria Bartiromo. So I think that China is probably going to be pretty concerned. But right now, if the party thinks that this is an existential issue about the origins of the coronavirus, it probably won't relent, despite what pressure we apply.
What does it tell you, Gordon, in that we now have the report that China may be attempting to pierce the cybersecurity of these research labs in the United States? Does that reveal to you that perhaps they don't have their hands around treatment or a vaccine, and that they're not as advanced as some in the U.S. media have given them credit for?
You know, that is a theory, and I think that it's a good one. We don't really know how far the Chinese are. I mean, they obviously had a head start because the disease originated in China. But the other thing is, we've got to remember that China will steal regardless. They've steal hundreds of billions of dollars of U.S. IP a year. Medicines are a part of Xi Jinping's, the Chinese ruler's, Made in China 2025 initiative to dominate that sector by the year 2025. Also, you know, we know that the race to a vaccine is like our decade's space race. So race to the moon. So, yeah, they're going to steal it regardless.
Nancy Pelosi addressed the administration's focus on China and their lack of transparency regarding COVID, saying the president is using it. Listen to this.
Well, right now, I think that the focus that they're placing on China is a diversion from doing what we have to do in our country. Yes, we want to know the source of this pandemic, but let's focus on why we are not testing, how we can help people, and how our states and localities are losing resources and perhaps jobs, unless we address their concerns.
Is it a distraction, Gordon, to focus on China? Why is it crucial to trace the virus to its source and to get answers on that front?
Yeah, I think the speaker is wrong on that. And the reason is our response, our willingness to cooperate with China depends on what China did. If this were an accidental release from a lab and it just sort of snuck out of China, well, that means that we can cooperate with Beijing. But if, as the evidence suggests, that China actually maliciously spread this virus beyond its borders, that it intentionally wanted to infect the rest of the world, and there's a lot of evidence that points in that direction, Raymond, then obviously we can't cooperate with China, and that will inform our response. So we need to know what Beijing actually did before we can even think about working with other countries, including China.
Human rights continues to be a problem in communist China. We've discussed this so many times in the past, Gordon. The U.S. government agency responsible for investing federal pension dollars is suspending investment in some Chinese companies for China's stonewalling on COVID and due to the human rights record there. Does this have any effect? Will it have any effect on Beijing? Or is this just like the trade pressure? It's a wash.
Well, this is really important for us to do, coronavirus or no coronavirus. I mean, the Commerce Department maintains an entity list, which means Americans can't do business with certain Chinese companies without getting prior approval. But we can invest in those companies. We can own them. We can enrich them with investment dollars. That makes no sense whatsoever. So it was important for the president to direct the Thrift Savings Board to actually not invest in these Chinese companies. We should not be enriching a country with our dollars that intends to harm us. And China, I believe, did so by allowing this disease, actually pushing this disease beyond its borders.
Gordon, you know we have this divide. You have the Wall Streeters and the investment class who say, wait a minute, this is the largest market in the world. We've got to use this market. We've got to be a part of this market. There are others who say, hold on. We now have a malicious actor in the world who may have released a virus to kill our people. They destroy and kill and maim and monitor and suppress the freedoms of their own people. Back in the old Cold War days, we basically did not do business with the Russians. Why do we continue to do business with China today? And should that stop in the wake of all we know now and the personal toll on American lives?
Well, it certainly should stop. The reason why we do it is because we felt after the end of the Cold War that we could integrate China into the international system, that they would become a responsible stakeholder. That has proven not to be the case. As China's grown richer and stronger, it's become more belligerent and provocative. And, you know, China right now is pushing this idea that it's the world's only sovereign state, which means that the United States is a vassal to China. I mean, that's just something that we cannot accept. So this is not competition with one country and another in the international system. Right. This is one country, China, trying to be a revolutionary to force everyone to acknowledge Chinese rule. That's just something that we're not going to do.
The hegemon, preeminence in the world. Yeah, that's clearly the goal here. Now, China's influence goes beyond its borders. They mobilize their countrymen overseas, Gordon, to act as agents, if you will, in other countries. How powerful is their disinformation network abroad? And do you see it increasing now that they're under such scrutiny?
Well, China has maintained the largest and most effective disinformation network. And we saw it in the early stages of the pandemic, where China's messages were actually resonating in many places, including allies of the U.S. Now, as people start to look at what China did, they are much less effective. And so I don't think China will be able to put its messages across, at least with the same effectiveness. And that's a good thing, because obviously China is not telling the truth on very critical elements of the story.
The U.S. news media all over the world have seemed to cover for China, even praising them for handling the outbreak despite the communist government's arrest of scientists and journalists. Why are news outlets in the U.S. and abroad blindly trusting what the Chinese government spoon feeds them with, even praising them for control of their citizenry and saying this is a model for the rest of the world?
Yeah, this is a big mystery because we're seeing a number of elements in our society push China's line. I can only guess what their motives are, but you get a sense that whatever Trump wants to do, people are anti-Trump. And I think that's part of it. And so that's why they've adopted Communist Party narratives. This is irresponsible in the extreme. And I don't care whether you like the president or not. We have an obligation to defend ourselves against a common enemy, and that's China.
Right. Yeah. I want to ask you about the foreign nationals studying STEM at U.S. universities. How big a source of intelligence and intellectual property are they to the Chinese government? And should the number of foreign students from China be restricted, in your opinion?
Yeah, I think that we need to restrict foreign students, Chinese students, until we get our hands around this problem, because it is one of great magnitude. I mean, we have Chinese students downloading entire databases and sending them to China. So clearly that is unacceptable. This, I think, is one of the most difficult issues that we face, because there are so many conflicting interests here. But until we understand exactly what's going on, we're going to have to do something that's going to cost us dearly, and that is restricting the access of Chinese students to our databases.
Amazing. China has been conducting landing exercises, Gordon, seemingly aimed at taking over islands. Now, you tweeted about this earlier this week, saying that China's just announced to the world that it's going to invade Taiwan. Is the global pandemic a convenient cover for China's expansionist plans?
I think that it's a cover. Also, they see it a moment of opportunity, because the U.S. Navy is stricken with coronavirus in Asia. And so it sees the absence of American ships in its peripheral waters. Also, I don't know what's going on in the Chinese political system, but obviously there are incentives there to take the most belligerent positions. So that's also a factor. So you have a lot of things working in the wrong, all pointing in the wrong direction at the same time. And that's why we need to be extremely concerned, Raymond, with what Beijing is saying and doing.
Gordon, you're an outsider to this controversy within the Catholic Church. There is a lot of huge debate about whether that concord that the Vatican signed with Beijing strengthened the hand of Beijing and undermined the Catholic underground faithful there. Your thoughts on what impact that agreement might have had, one way or the other?
That agreement, I think, was certainly detrimental to the interests of the church and to China's Catholics. I don't know this, but I suspect that you have a number of Catholics now praying in Protestant unofficial congregations because Beijing has been able to use that agreement to undermine the church. And that they did it from the very beginning, violating the agreement. I think the Pope should never have entertained this.
Gordon Chang, we will leave it there. Thank you for being with us. We will check in the days ahead. And you can follow Gordon's work on Twitter at Gordon G. Chang. Don't miss it. He's got great insights into China, North Korea, and much more. Thank you, Gordon.
Thank you, Raymond.
As the U.S. economy begins to open up in various states across the country, what will higher education look like in the fall? To discuss how these universities are opening up, we're pleased to be joined by Christopher Ice. He's the president of Ave Maria University in Naples, Florida, and Dr. Timothy Trainor, president of Mount St. Mary's University in Emmitsburg, Maryland. Gentlemen, thank you both for being with us. President Trainor, I want to start with you. How did you come to the decision to have person-to-person classes scheduled to resume this fall, and how does that square with Maryland's reopening?
Well, good afternoon, Ray. Thanks for having me on here. We have been following a set of guiding principles in our planning, and those principles are first and foremost the health and safety of our community, the success of our students in executing our mission to graduate ethical leaders who are inspired by a passion for learning and lead lives of significance and service to God and others. We're going to continue to be flexible, just like we were when we transitioned to remote instruction in March. And then we're going to emphasize the empathy for everyone, because everyone's experience has been different here. Our plan squares well with the governor's plan. The governor here in Maryland has started what he calls stage 1, effective tomorrow, of his roadmap to recovery plan. And we expect to be in stage 2, which allows us a return to campus in a controlled environment, meaning exercising social distancing, having appropriate health and safety protocols in place, like the wearing of face masks, physical distancing, and social distancing protocols. And we have a plan. We've been planning for many scenarios, and we're going to continue to plan over the summer. But we feel confident that we can have some students on campus and some connecting in remotely, whether they're in the classroom, in a different part of the campus, or at home for the first semester. So we're
President Ice, let me get to President Ice. Even after you began online classes in March, 21% of the Ave Maria student body chose to stay on campus because it was safer for some than traveling back home. Now, Ave Maria has 0 cases of COVID-19. What sorts of social distancing guidelines or other measures did you put in place to keep students safe?
Well, basically what we did was we went to the online format in March, but we allowed students who felt more comfortable to stay here than to travel, some of them international students, others in the hotbeds of New York or Michigan even. So we allowed them to do it, and we said, if you leave, you can't come back. But as long as we had plans in place for quarantining if need be. We had students that were, again, separating in some of that, but we closed down the recreational facilities and some of that. So it certainly wasn't a wonderful experience like they would normally have. But again, a lot of the students felt safe and they were still able to interact with the community. We also had continued to receive Holy Communion. Each day we had virtual mass, and then the priest, our bishop, allowed our priest to come outside and distribute Holy Communion, which is a beautiful opportunity for students to continue the sacraments. So That was it was different, but we had that opportunity and we took advantage of it, and many students did as well. So,
how will life change for those Ave Maria students returning in the fall?
but we're planning on all the students to return. We do have all the proper precautions, as Dr. Raynor mentioned at the Mount St. Mary's. We're putting in place the social distancing, and especially within the classroom. That's some of our plans. Again, with the dormitories and that, we may have distancing, some of that as well. We're doing all the cleaning and all those type of things as well.
President Trainor, some universities are looking at having limited housing available on campus with single dorm rooms only. Will there be any of those changes on your campus?
Yeah, yes, we're working through that plan right now. Our campus housing for students varies building by building in terms of the number of students who would normally be in a room, the amenities, and so we're developing a plan building by building now. There'll be some restrictions in place to enforce social distancing. Don't know exactly what they'll be, but we'll have some students living on campus, but not as many as in a normal year.
I'm going to give each of you a crack at this. I'll start with President Ice. Is there any reluctance on the part of your students? Have you heard from them a reluctance to return to campus, given what they're seeing in the media, the constant death count? And let's face it, there's a lot of fear out there. I'll start with you, President Ice.
Yes, there is a segment of the student population that's concerned, as well as their parents, about returning to campus. And but I also believe that there's a large segment that do not like the online courses. They prefer to have the in-person interaction and those relationships. And that's, I've had a lot of saying, we thought online might be the way to go. It might be fun. It was great for a week. But after that, we miss our friends. We miss those relationships we built. And we're anxious to get back on campus. And we're anxious to have them back. That is our campus, is student interaction. So,
President Trainor, your reaction. What are your students telling you?
Yeah, ours has been very similar to what Chris has said. Our students, we found, really miss being on campus. They love the environment and really miss their friends and the faculty and staff. So after I made the announcement on Friday, I did receive one note from a parent and from a student of concern. But they wanted to know, would they have the opportunity if they felt concerned about coming back onto campus, whether they were immune compromised themselves or they had somebody at home that was immune compromised. They didn't want to bring anything back to them. Would they be able to do their coursework remotely for a semester? And I said, yes, and that's why we're doing some technology investment to enable that. So if students don't feel comfortable for some reason, they'll be able to stay home for a semester and continue their education remotely. But the vast majority want to be on campus.
Yeah, I know my son's going into his senior year, and though you're right, as Christopher said, he enjoyed it for about a week, the remote stuff. He's ready to get back to campus. He's raring to go. The University of Michigan estimates that it may lose up to $1 billion by the end of the year due to this pandemic. Now, hundreds of schools, including some with huge endowments, Duke University and Virginia Tech and Brown, have announced hiring freezes. Have you all had to cut or reduce staff? I'll start with Christopher Ice.
Yes, we have put a hiring freeze in place, and we do have to be cognizant of the fact that people, it's not just impacting enrollment, it's impacting our benefactors as well, who are being hurt financially and may not be able to give as much. So there's a lot of factors that go into that, but we have instituted a hiring freeze, and then we've also just continued to look and to monitor all the areas of expenses that we can, and working through this new budget cycle coming up on July 1. So,
Timothy Trainor, have you all had to cut back on staff?
Oh, no, not yet. We same thing. We have a hiring freeze in place. We committed to not furloughing or laying anybody off through the end of this fiscal year, which ends at the end of June. We did some tiered salary reductions. And some reduction of contributions to the retirement accounts for April, May, and June to to allow us to keep everybody fully employed through June. We've committed to that. we're looking at the financial ramifications of fiscal year 21. A lot depends on the extent to which we can open in the fall. So we're still working through that.
Well, I hope that everybody can get back to campus. I know that's where students want to be, and it's where parents want them to be, too. So, gentlemen, thank you both for being here. Before we go, Christopher, I want to express our condolences on the passing of your dear wife. She's in our prayers, as are you, and we're with you in this difficult time. Gentlemen, thank you both for being with us. She's the mother of 6, a stand-up comic, and has just released her 3rd book, Your Blue Flame, Drop the Guilt and Do What Makes You Come Alive. And until this Friday, she was the host of her own radio show on Sirius XM. She's leaving radio behind, and she's here tonight to tell us why. We'll also talk about her new book and this wild ride that families are on during this pandemic. Please welcome via Skype from Austin, Texas, Jennifer Fulwiler. Jen, thanks for joining me. Now, you started your radio show on Sirius in 2014, first as a weekly show, then it expanded to a daily show, 2-hour show. Give me a sense of why you're quitting this radio show after 6 years, and during a pandemic, no less.
Raymond, the whole thing has been a wild ride. I don't know if I ever told you, but I never intended to do radio. And then I end up on the station with broadcasters. Like, I admired Lino Rulli as a broadcaster for years. I never thought I'd be the show leading up to his. And so the whole thing was surreal. And if I've learned one thing from the fact that I never intended to go into radio, but I ended up in radio, when you feel like it's the right time to make a move and the doors seem to be opening and things seem to be working out, you've just got to do it. And I will be honest with you, Raymond, my plan of what I'm doing next is not fully formed, but it felt like it was the right time to move on, even though I have just quit a very stable job in the middle of a global pandemic.
Well, but you know, and I was your first guest on the show and your near last guest on the show the other day. Are you nervous about this transition? I mean, it seems to me your life is maybe properly reflecting the title of your book. You know, Your Blue Flame really is about finding your reason. I want to read something from the book and then get your reaction to this. You write, when I was an atheist, I knew that writing was my blue flame. I'd started and stopped a bunch of writing projects, but none of them felt like they were going anywhere. This passion wasn't bringing the spark into my life. After my conversion, when I prayed for direction about what I was destined to do, instead of just thinking about what I personally wanted to do, I suddenly received clarity. Is that what's going on now? Clarity.
That is exactly right. It's exactly right that I feel like God gives each one of us gifts that we're meant to share with the world, and it's not up to us as to how we share it and when we share it in a different way. And my friends who are not believers, they're like, so wait, tell me again, you felt God telling you to do this, but you don't have a plan. And you asked if I was nervous. Raymond, I'm terrified. I'm terrified. This is the biggest leap I've ever taken in my career, but this is the heart of the Blue Flame message, that if you're meant to do something and you're meant to share in a certain way, the best thing you can do is let God lead you down the path and leave the results up to him.
Well, explain the image of the blue flame to people who might not understand that. Why not a white flame or a red flame?
Okay. Well, I didn't come up with the term. It was actually a friend of mine who first introduced me to it. And, you know, the blue flame is the hottest part of the flame. And when you use these God-given gifts, essentially what you're doing is you're becoming the person who God intended you to be. You are becoming the truest version of yourself. And that's why I think this image resonates with so many people, is that just like the blue part of the flame is the hottest part of the flame, when you use your most sacred gifts, you become the truest, most pure version of yourself.
You offer help to readers to find their blue flame, and you tell them, grab a pen and 7 cocktail napkins, and then you ask them to write down answers to several questions and to dedicate 3 minutes to each of these questions. Now, some of the questions you suggest are the following. List all the times you felt truly alive. What is something your friends hate to do that you love to do? And what are some occasions when you've helped another person? Did you go through this exercise?
I did, and I've done it with many friends, and it usually was on cocktail napkins, although a lot of us don't have paper products right now, so maybe people are writing on their hands when they do it.
chalk on the children's chalkboard that you're homeschooling them on. You can use that as well, I guess. Yeah. How does the writing exercise help unlock one's true calling?
Because I think that what holds so many of us back is our fears. It's terrifying. For example, if music is your blue flame, if singing, giving back to the world in that way is your passion, it's terrifying to imagine putting yourself out there. What if people make fun of you? What if they say you're no good at this? And the idea of sitting down and making these lists for 3 minutes and not stopping is that eventually, just to fill that time, you will end up getting really honest with yourself about what your God-given gifts really are.
You have a title, the chapter title, Blow It Up. It made me think of that Sondheim song. You know that, do you know Sunday in the Park with George? Do you know that musical?
Only, I'm not as cultured as you are, Raymond, but you know, if you want to talk about like a Real Housewives episode, I might be more familiar.
I miss that. You see, I don't watch that. But you will love this. You should look it up. It's a song called Move On, and it comes at the end of Sunday in the Park with George. And there's a lyric that, and I thought of this as I read your book, stop wondering where you're going, move on. You know, let others make that decision. You know, they usually do, you know, about whether you succeed or not. You write about how you and your husband made a huge lifestyle change many times before. For our viewers sitting at home itching to find their blue flame, but uneasy about it, particularly in the midst of this pandemic, what do you say? I mean, you've got 6 kids. You're blowing the radio thing up. This has to be traumatic for you all.
Well, you know what? I think the kids are used to it at this point. They accepted a long time ago that their parents are crazy. But one of the things that goes with that chapter that I talk about in the book is that blowing it up, making these big changes, using your blue flame, it's going to work out. That there are different speeds of life and levels of pressure that different people like to live under. So my husband and I happen to be the kind of people who tend to thrive with big challenges and big pressure. Whereas a friend of mine, you know, Raymond, what she's been doing, her blue flame, she's gotten into cookie decorating. So she's been making funny cookies with silly messages and dropping them off to her neighbors during this pandemic. But she's a little bit introverted. So for her, that's blowing things up. For her, that is being crazy, actually knocking on neighbors' doors, dropping off these cookies. So for her, that's what it looks like to blow it up. For me, it's leaving a daily 2-hour talk radio show with a national platform that provided benefits for my whole family in the middle of a pandemic. So, you know, different levels of pressure we all like.
I'll say, okay, what happens next? Are you going to go on the comedy tour? And how do you do that when many of these theatrical venues might not be open till the end of the year, maybe next year?
So that was my big plan. When I first discerned this, I felt like I was meant to connect with my fans more through this comedy touring. And that was my original inspiration to leave SiriusXM. So when everything got shut down, I assumed that God would kind of withdraw that call, so to speak, that it would be like, oh, just kidding, the whole quit your job thing. Actually, don't do that. I had no idea that was coming. But instead, the call persisted. And so I should have a more professional answer. I'm just going to be totally honest, Raymond. I'm kind of still figuring it out.
Well, that's where we all are. We're all figuring it out. You stumble and you bumble along until you figure out what the calling was. You know, years ago, Father Benedict Rochelle told me, who was a great Franciscan friar. He was my spiritual director for a little bit of time in New York. And he used to say, you only have a flashlight, and that flashlight only illuminates the next step. It doesn't show down the path, and it certainly doesn't extend to the end. So you have to go one step at a time. It's the way it is. So that's trusting Providence, and I'm glad to see you and your blue flame are, Jennifer Fulwiler. And we certainly wish you the best. Stay in touch. I hope you will.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. It's an adventure, right?
Yeah, that's right. And you make it fun. Your blue flame, Drop the Guilt and Do What Makes You Come Alive by Jennifer Fulwiler is available now at bookstores everywhere and online. Visit her website, jenniferfulwiler.com. Bye, Jen. Stay safe and get out on that
Thank you so much.
comedy
It was
stage.
great to be here virtually.
Thank you. See you soon. As businesses gradually reopen, there's a renewed hope for economic recovery. But what about those small to medium-sized businesses, particularly those in the hospitality industry post-COVID? My next guest is an entrepreneur and founder of Accountable Equity. He's here to tell us firsthand just how much business has to overcome. Please welcome Josh McCallan. Josh, you're heavily involved in hospitality in your company. How much harder has it been for this industry to cope with the economic shutdown apart from other industries?
Great question, and it's a pleasure to be with you, Raymond. Here's where we are. We had to shut down because we're in New Jersey, one of our resorts. So we had to actually pause, and that allowed us to kind of take its assessment of what we could do to reopen. We're not even near that yet.
Now, you and your wife, Melanie, recently had your 10th child in March. You were set to open a major project, a Renault winery resort in New Jersey. You had over 100 new employees hired and ready to go. Weddings were booked. Then the pandemic hits. What were your first thoughts when you realized the shutdown was coming? And how do you deal with this kind of curveball?
Well, surprisingly, that curveball happened while Melanie was having the baby. The president and you guys were covering this live that week while we were having the baby. So our thought was, how do we keep everybody whole and safe? We immediately had to, we went into like a 5-day planning period where we kept everybody on salary. In about 5 days later, when the government asked us to shut everything down, we did an immediate furlough. It was one of the heartbreaking parts of running the business. We were only able to keep about 10 of our 100 people because when you have a hospitality asset and a business like ours, there's nothing for us to do other than the executives trying to dig out of it. There's nothing to do to serve. We can't serve if there's no guests at this time.
Yeah, there are no guests. And for the foreseeable future, it's going to be very limited. I want to play something for you. This is one of the president's economic advisors, Ray Washburn. He's a Dallas-based businessman, a restaurateur, property manager. He had this to say about the gradual reopening of businesses in Texas. I want to see how his understanding comports with yours. Watch.
If you're going to crawl to 25%, being in the largest employer in the state of Texas is the restaurant business, and we just can't go at something at just 25%. The losses are going to mount for the entire industry. We've got to go bring employees back on. We have to run 100% kitchen, 100% front of the house. And I applaud the governor for wanting to get the state back open up. But at 25%, the operational difficulties are immense for all of us. And so I just am like, you're either all in or you're not. If they choose not to open up, I'd rather not open at all than at 25%.
Your thoughts on that, Josh? This seems a pretty grim picture. Does that ring true for you in your resort, in your hospitality industry and business?
Let me explain. If you don't mind, I'll back up. 25% is a non-starter probably for any hospitality asset or any business because the businesses are not 50%, 75% profitable. So if you take away exorbitant amounts of revenue, then you're just contracting all that overhead costs. Remember, like that gentleman just said, you have the kitchen staff, which are paid well. You have the front of house staff that are paid well, and they're full. You have to have full timers in there. They have to be there to be open. So the way you benefit as a business is you sell more because you have to pay for all of us workers that have a living wage. So it's probably impossible for any business to succeed at 25%.
So what's the answer here? How do you resume? How do medium to small businesses like yours recover? I mean, do you qualify for any of the federal funds, or is all that money gone, basically?
Yeah, we have some good news to share, actually. Our business, if you don't mind me explaining, was built on wedding as a core. We're a historic winery, one of the oldest in the country. So we have a 155-year history. By the way, I joke that even the Great Recession, the Great Depression, and Prohibition couldn't shut this winery down. So we're going to make it. We're fine. As a matter of fact, our contractual revenue, which is weddings in the future, this is where we gratefully have a privileged situation over a regular a la carte restaurant. Our business is so enormous, 240 acres. We've sold weddings for the next 2 years. That allows us to have contractual revenue. So what we did is we immediately jumped into discussions with brides, discussions on how to move their wedding to a time where we thought it would be outside the pandemic halo. So we preserved our unique business by accommodating our contractual revenue outside of the immediate pinch point. If we were just a restaurant or just a hotel, we would not have been able to succeed as we did.
Josh, thanks for the insight. You can find out more about accountable equity and the work of Josh McCallan at accountableequity.com. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Just as a reminder, all 3 installments of the Will Wilder saga are now available in paperback. You can also get them as audiobooks, hardcovers. Go out and get your copies. They're at willwilderbooks.com. There's also a preview there, and you can order from various retailers, especially your independent bookstores. Those are listed there as well. You need to support them. They're having a really rough time now. And don't forget, The World Over is now available as a podcast. It's easy to find. Visit Apple's iTunes podcast store. Search World Over. On Spotify, it's EWTN World Over. And I post all of our segments individually and the full show on Twitter and Facebook. You can always find it there. That's all the time we have for now. Be sure to catch us next week. Until then, we'll be scouting the world over for all that is seen and unseen. On behalf of the staff and crew of EWTN News, thank you for watching. I'm Raymond Arroyo from New Orleans. Bye now.